You are standing inside a corridor that smells of beeswax, orange blossom, and slow-burning ambition. The year is 1715. Louis XIV has not yet taken his final breath, but the palace already knows it is coming. Every mirror in the Hall of Mirrors reflects not just candlelight, it reflects the weight of a kingdom that ran entirely on performance. Noblemen competed for the honor of handing the king his shirt each morning. That was power. That was survival. This is not a history lesson. This is what it actually felt like to breathe inside Versailles, reconstructed frame by frame using AI. Versailles was never just a palace. It was a machine, engineered to make every duke, every duchess, every foreign ambassador understand one single truth, that Louis XIV was not merely a king, he was the architecture itself. In this video, we step inside that machine, room by room, ritual by ritual, secret by secret. Every image you'll see has been reconstructed using AI trained on historical records, court memoirs, and royal inventories that survived the revolution. If you've never subscribed, now is the moment. Drop a comment with the one Versailles secret you already know, and if this opens a door you didn't expect, and hit like. Let's walk in. At precisely 7:30 in the morning, a clock chimed inside the royal bedchamber, and the entire palace shifted. This was not a private moment. It never was. The king's awakening was a ceremony, staged, sequenced, and witnessed. The ritual was called the lever, and every man in that room understood that standing there was not a privilege. It was a political position. The first gentleman of the bedchamber entered first. He drew back the bed curtains. He announced the hour. He did not speak unless spoken to. Then the princes of the blood entered, then the dukes, each rank arriving in precise order, because disorder in this room meant disorder in France. Louis XIV did not simply wake up. He was presented to his kingdom, one layer of clothing at a time. The man who handed him his shirt held more informal power than most ministers with offices and titles. Outside that door, 40 noblemen waited in an antechamber, hoping to be called in. Most were not. That silence was deliberate. By the time Louis XIV stood fully dressed, every man present had been ranked, evaluated, and reminded of his exact position in the universe. The king had not yet spoken a single word of policy, and already, the court was already working exactly as he designed it to. No one at Versailles ever discussed money. That was precisely the point. The gold leaf on every wall, the 10,000 candles replaced nightly, the fountains running on engineered water systems larger than most cities, all of it existed as if conjured from air. It was not conjured. It was extracted from the fields of Normandy, from the salt taxes of Brittany, from the backs of farmers who had never seen a mirror in their lives. Louis XIV employed a finance minister named Colbert, a man who understood one brutal truth. A king who appears to lack nothing never gets questioned. Colbert built a taxation system so layered that no single person could trace exactly where the money went. That opacity was not incompetence, it was architecture. The nobility at Versailles paid almost nothing. Their exemption from taxes was the price the king paid to keep them decorative and politically harmless. Meanwhile, the court spent on wigs, on embroidered shoes worn once, on banquets where the food was theater, not sustenance. By 1715, France carried a debt that would take 3 generations to crack, and ultimately never would. The revolution of 1789 did not begin with ideology. It began with an empty treasury and a starving countryside that finally did the arithmetic. Every gilded surface in Versailles has a number behind it, and that number always had a human face attached. Louis XIV ate alone, in public, in front of an audience that was not invited to sit. This was called the Grand Couvert, a formal supper where the king consumed his meal on a raised platform while courtiers stood and watched in complete silence. They were not watching him eat. They were watching power digest itself. The kitchen at Versailles operated like a military campaign. 498 people were required to produce, transport, and present a single royal supper. The food traveled through corridors so long that by the time it reached the king's table, almost every dish had gone cold. Louis XIV ate cold food for most of his reign, and no one ever mentioned it. That silence was the most revealing detail of all. Truth had no seat at this table. Sugar sculptures of fortresses, spun glass centerpieces, pheasants redressed in their own feathers. The food was constructed to be seen before it was tasted. Certain courtiers held the specific role of handing the king his napkin, his bread, his wine. Each gesture had a designated rank attached to it. To be excluded from the banquet hall entirely was not a logistical inconvenience. It was a public demotion, visible to every pair of eyes in the palace. At Versailles, hunger was never about food. It was always about proximity to the man who never went without. At Versailles, the wrong shade of ribbon could end a career before breakfast. Clothing was not personal expression at the French court. It was a declaration read by every pair of eyes in every corridor, every antechamber, every gilded salon you passed through. Louis XIV understood that visual language travels faster than any written decree, so he legislated appearance itself. Certain colors were legally untouchable: gold thread, deep violet, scarlet, reserved exclusively for the royal family. Wearing them without permission was not a fashion mistake. It was an act of defiance. The king controlled the silk industry in Lyon through royal mandate. Every bolt of fabric that entered Versailles had passed through a system he designed and owned. Noblemen bankrupted themselves maintaining wardrobes that could signal relevance. To appear in last season's embroidery was to announce your distance from the center of power. The king himself changed outfits multiple times daily, each change another choreographed ceremony, another moment where proximity meant everything. Wigs followed the same brutal logic. The higher the wig, the closer the claim to importance. Men measured social altitude in inches of horsehair. Foreign diplomats arriving at Versailles were assessed within seconds, not by what they said, but by what their tailor had understood about French power. In a palace where every surface performed, the body was simply one more surface, and those who forgot that, forgot it only once. In the summer of 1715, the most powerful man in Europe could no longer walk. Gangrene had moved through his left leg with a speed that no physician, no ceremony, and no amount of royal will could negotiate with. For the first time in 72 years, the lever did not proceed as designed. The bedchamber fell quiet in a way it had never been trained to be. Courtiers who had spent entire lifetimes learning to read the king's face now stood at doorways, reading nothing, because the performance had finally stopped. Louis XIV summoned his 5-year-old great-grandson, the future Louis XV, and spoke to him directly. He told the child not to imitate his love of war and his excessive spending. He had learned too late what his palace had cost. That moment, a dying king warning his heir against himself, was the only unscripted scene Versailles ever witnessed. On September 1st, 1715, at 8:15 in the morning, Louis XIV died in the same bed where he had performed his lever thousands of times before. Within hours, the court fractured, alliances dissolved. Noblemen who had competed for the right to hand him a napkin now scrambled for position in a world that no longer had a center. The Hall of Mirrors did not mourn. It simply reflected whatever walked past it next. The machine had outlived its maker, and that perhaps was the most terrifying thing Louis XIV ever built. Versailles was built to make time feel frozen, to convince everyone inside its walls that this version of the world was permanent, inevitable, and beyond questioning. It was not. Nothing built on performance ever is. What AI reconstruction allows us to do is not simply see the past. It forces us to stand inside it, to feel the specific weight of a world where your ribbon, your position at the table, your proximity to a dying king determined everything about your existence. That feeling is the point. History doesn't live in dates, it lives in rooms. We'll be in another one next week. Leave the one you want us to enter in the comments below.